You're still awake, or maybe you've just found your way here for the first time. Either way, you're safe. Welcome to the Lady Mythos. Here, we don't rush, we listen to the stories the world buried deep, to women turned into monsters, to truths that waited too long. Before we return to Medusa, if there's a story you'd like to hear, or a place you're listening from, I'd love to know. Leave a comment anytime. It helps me picture the little circle we're all sitting in, even if we're scattered across different corners of the world. You, me, and the myths between us. When we left her, Medusa was living in exile, far from the temples, far from the mortal world. Tonight, we'll see what happens when a hero sets out in search for her. Chapter 6. Perseus prepares. Gifts and ambition. While Medusa learns the shape of her days at the far shore, another story is gathering itself on an island where people live close together. Trade news over fish and olives, and know each other's business perhaps a little too well. This is where Perseus grows up, not as a legend, but as a boy with a mother and a limited set of choices. The outline is steady across tellings. Perseus is the son of Danae, a woman whose life has already been shaped by a king's fear and a god's attention. The details change from poet to poet, but the feeling is the same. Danae tries to keep her child safe. The world does not make that easy. They end up far from the courts and rituals of big cities, living on the edge of power, where a local ruler can decide too much. That ruler is Polydectes. His interests turns toward Danae, which puts Perseus in the position many young men know too well, between a mother who needs protection and a powerful man who doesn't like being told no. It's a delicate balance. You cannot challenge a king head-on without inviting disaster. You also cannot watch your mother be pressed and do nothing. Stories from that world often find a third path, the impossible task. Polydectes announces a plan that looks harmless on the surface. There's to be a gift, a grand gesture, a demand disguised as a celebration. Different versions name a wedding, a collection, a levee. Everyone must contribute something rare. In some retellings, the goal is a horse. In others, it's simply tribute. Perseus, who has no wealth to offer, speaks with the boldness of the young and the cornered. He will bring something greater than any horse. He will bring the head of Medusa. The moment lands differently depending on who's listening. A practical person might think he has just promised his own death. A poet might hear the gods move. A politician would see exactly what Polydectes wanted. A pledge that removes a problem without the king having to dirty his hands. If Perseus returns, the king gets a trophy. If Perseus fails, the king is rid of him. Either way, the pressure is on Danae loosens for a while. Either way, the pressures on Danae loosens for a while. From here, the language of the story changes. It stops sounding like human politics and starts to sound like a divine arrangement. When a hero in Greek myth takes on a task that crosses into the territory of gods and monsters, the gods begin to take sides. They choose favorites. They lend tools. Success and failure become signals, not only for a person's courage, but as a deity's favor. Two gods step forward for Perseus, Athena and Hermes. Athena's reasons are rarely spelled out. In some versions, she despises the violation of her temple and wants the figure connected to that offense contained or ended. In others, she simply prefers order, and Medusa represents a dangerous break in the order of things. Whatever the reason, she chooses Perseus to carry her solution. Not because he's the strongest, but because he's directable, young enough to be taught, clear-headed enough to follow instructions, and moral enough to keep the plan once it's set. Hermes, the traveler's god, the messenger, the guide of souls, he joins for reasons that fit his nature. He is the patron of those who move between places, sailors, merchants, messengers, thieves when they are clever rather than cruel. A quest to the world's edge is exactly the kind of journey he understands. Together, they begin to outfit Perseus. The list of gifts is famous, but it helps to hear what each one is for in plain terms. A polished shield from Athena, not just bright, but mirror bright. Its purpose is simple and life-saving. Perseus must not look at Medusa directly. The shield lets him see reflections, so he can move toward her without meeting her gaze. Think of it as the first rule of a dangerous craft. Do the work indirectly so the danger cannot do its work on you. A curved blade, often called a harp, associated with Hermes or forged by a divine smith. It's meant for a clean, quick cut. Perseus is not going to negotiate. He is going to decapitate, a being whose gaze turns men to stone. In myth, tools often carry a moral weight. This one is straightforward. It's not a weapon of chaos. It is a precise instrument. Winged sandals from Hermes, because distance and terrain should not be the deciding factor in a god-guided task. They shorten long ground, carry a mortal over bad footing, and turn escape from a cliff-ringed coast into something possible. A cap of invisibility, the helm of Hades. Not always granted in every version, but often included. Its use is not for ambush in this telling. It is for leaving. After the strike, when enemies multiply, a clean exit matters more than a dramatic fight. A sack, the kibbasis, made to hold something dangerous without letting it touch anything else. This is not a flourish. It is the sober recognition that Medusa's head does not stop working when it's severed. In later episodes, its power to petrify continues, which tells us the gods expect the tool to be as dangerous as the target. If you set these objects on a table, they don't look like the props of a braggart. They look like the kit of a careful worker, a mirror for indirect sight, a sharp blade, good footwear, a hat that lets you pass unseen when needed, and a bag that keeps a live danger contained. What sounds like magic in one tone reads like procedure in another. Before Perseus can use any of it, he has to find Medusa. This is the part where stories talk about the Graeae, the old women who share one eye and one tooth between them. In some versions, Perseus seizes the shared eye to win information. In others, he bargains. However it's told, the sequence has a purpose. The world does not give up a being like Medusa to anyone who asks. There are gatekeepers, riddles, detours. The Graeae are a way to make Perseus work for his path, to show what that force alone is not enough. He must be clever and controlled. It's useful to pause over that. Greek hero tales admire strength, but they vary of it when it's loud and blind. The heroes who survive are the ones who can hold a plan in their heads and keep to it under stress. Athena favors that kind of person. Hermes does too. Their gifts don't replace thought, they reward it. Athena's training of Perseus is not shown as a long montage, but we can understand it without spectacle. She teaches him to use the shield like a surface of water. Anyone who has tried to shave with a handheld mirror or to row a boat by watching the reflection of a shoreline knows the skill. Your hands must move opposite to your eyes. Your brain must learn a new mapping. He practices until he can walk towards a drawn mark while looking only at its echo. He practices stepping sideways while keeping the reflected image steady. He learns, in short, to trust what the reflections tell him more than the urge to look up. Hermes's part is more about movement and timing. The sandals are helpful, but they are not a cure for clumsiness. He teaches Perseus to lift and set down lightly, to measure space as if the ground could shift, to listen to wind and ledge, and the way air changes in a cave. Hermes' talent is to cross thresholds. He passes a bit of that talent along. At some point, the gods stop talking and expect Perseus to decide. This is another steady element in Greek stories. A god may hand you a tool and a plan, but the moment of action is always yours. Divine help does not erase human choice. It sharpens it. Perseus must become the kind of person who can enter a place where he should not be, do a hard thing without hesitation, and leave without looking back. Meanwhile, the human world goes on. Polydectes keeps his face smooth in public and waits. Danae prays to Athena, perhaps the goddess who seems to be near her son, or simply to any power that will hear a mother's hope. Friends of Perseus, if he has them, give the kind of help friends can give in a small place. A water skin that doesn't leak, a cloak that keeps out wind, a promise to watch over Danae while he's gone. None of this appears in verse, but in a real village, this is how departures work. Before he leaves, there's also the work of learning the target. In the stories, this means knowing that only one of the Gorgons is mortal, and that is Medusa. The others, Steno and Uriel, are impervious to his blade. He must move through their space without engaging them. He must strike swiftly and exactly. He must not be pulled into a fight he cannot win. If the older tellings make the Gorgons sound like place guardians, then Perseus is a trespasser who intends to take something from a guarded space. Even with divine backing, that is dangerous work. There are ethical questions here that later ages will ask more loudly than the ancient poets did. Is Perseus a hero, or just a man sent to solve a problem the gods made? Does the beauty of a shield and the authority of a goddess make the act clean? Ancient audiences accepted the assignment because the gods assigned it. Modern listeners often hear the dissonance. A mortal woman was changed by a goddess after a god's violence, and now another mortal is sent to finish her. We can hold both understandings at once. The story moves toward its appointed scene, and we can feel the weight of that movement. If Perseus thinks about such things, the story doesn't say. What it does show is a young man doing the small, calm tasks a person does when they are trying to approach something enormous without being swallowed by it. He checks the edge of the harp. He polishes the shield because fingerprints will work against him when he needs the reflection to be clean. He practices a grip on the sack so he can open it quickly and close it without brushing the thing he needs to contain. He tests the sandals over uneven ground until he trusts them not to tip him into air when he doesn't want it. And then there is rest. It sounds like an odd inclusion in a heroic tale, but it matters. People who go into difficult places without sleeping make mistakes. So the night before he leaves the human world for the long stretch of sea and edge, we can imagine him lying on his back, awake longer than he wants, listening to the small sounds of a house that will not hear him again for a while. He turns the shield so it faces the wall. A mirror in a dark room can feel like an eye. He closes his eyes and says whatever a person says when they want courage to feel like calm rather than heat. At first light, he goes to the threshold, that place Greek stories love, the line between one state and the next. And the next. The sandals make the path shorter. The gods are quiet now. That is part of the arrangement too. Help gets a person ready. It doesn't carry them over the line. Along the way, we still face the Graeae, and then the Nymphs, who in some versions provide the sandals, the cap, and the sack. We're not rushing past them. We're placing them where they belong, as keepers of information and tools along a road that only opens for those who keep their nerve. With each exchange, Perseus proves he can ask clearly, take only what he needs, and move on. This is a different kind of bravery than wrestling a beast. It is the bravery of staying small and exact when the task is large. By the time Perseus reaches the last stretch, the coast that faces Medusa's cave, he's not the boy who blurted a promise at a king's feast. He's someone who has learned new hands. He can look at the world sideways and still walk straight. He can keep a blade steady while his eyes look the other way. He can sit down and lift up without sound. Those are human skills taught by gods, and they are the only reason he'll have any chance at all. Back on the island, people will ask Danae if she has news. She won't. News travels fast when it's small and easy. This is not that kind of story. The next news they hear will be either the quiet return of her son, or the quiet absence that becomes permanent when people stop mentioning a name, because mentioning it hurts. That waiting is a kind of labor too, even if poets don't sing it. So the stage is nearly set. On one side, Medusa, in a cave that has taught her every sound it can make, with a life that world called exile, but that she turned into a steady practice of surviving. On the other, Perseus, fitted with tools that make indirect work possible, guided by two gods who prefer skill to noise. Between them, a shore where the wind and the stone don't care about stories. What happens next is quick in the telling and permanent in effect. But before we step into that cave, there are a few final way stations to pass. The old women with their shared eye, the nymphs with their precise gifts, and the last rehearsal of a plan that cannot afford a single direct look. That is where we'll go next. Chapter 7. The Graeae Sisters and the Nymphs. Perseus has his shield polished to a shine, the harp ready in its sheath, and the courage that comes from preparation. But courage alone will not find Medusa. In the ancient way of telling, the path to a figure like her is never straight. There are no roads, no signposts, only the guarded knowledge of beings older than the quest itself. The first of these waypoints are the Graeae. Their name means the grey ones, and it is not just about hair color. They are grey in the way weathered stone is grey, old beyond counting, worn by time, but not diminished by it. They are sisters, like the Gorgons, but their connection is stranger. They share between them one eye and one tooth. This is not a weakness. It is a sign of their unity, a physical reminder that they live as parts of a single whole. In most versions, they dwell in a place as far from men as the Gorgons themselves. The air is thin, the ground stony, the wind pulling at a traveler's cloak. The Graeae live in a small, dim place that smells of herbs hung to dry and something older. Perhaps the scent of the earth itself. When one sister needs to see, she takes the eye from the other, sets it in her own face, and for a time she has vision. Then she passes it on. The tooth is treated with the same care. Perseus comes to them, not as a guest, but as someone on a clock he cannot see. In one telling, he waits until the moment of transfer, the eye leaving one set of fingers, just about to be placed into the next. His hand closes around it in midair. Now all three are blind. Their voices come at once, old, sharp, and indignant. They demand its return. Perseus answers evenly. He will give it back if they tell him how to reach the nymphs, who guard what he still lacks for his journey. The Graeae are keepers of knowledge, not warriors. They know the paths beyond human maps. They understand the locations that gods and monsters share only among themselves. And so they tell him, a string of landmarks, a river whose source is warm even in winter, a stand of trees that hum in the wind, a place where the earth opens to a grove that is green even in the driest season. When they are finished, Perseus does not pocket the eye as a prize. He places it carefully into one sister's palm. The transaction is complete. No debt remains. In myth, that balance matters. Taking without returning is theft. Taking and returning is part of an older, rougher code. The path brings him to the Nymphs, beings who live tied to their places, springs, trees, hidden valleys. These nymphs are not naive. They have heard of Perseus. They know what he is after and what it will mean when he finds it. But they are also part of the chain of this quest. And in Greek stories, once the chain is set, each link plays its part. They give him three things. First, the kibisis, the bag designed to hold something dangerous without letting it touch anything else. It is light when empty, stronger than it looks. The leather worked until it feels almost soft. Second, the helm of Hades, plain to look at, but once on the head, the wearer is unseen. This is not a gift for striking. It is a gift for leaving, for crossing the space between danger and safety without being stopped. Third, in some versions, they give the winged sandals, if he has not yet received them from Hermes, strapping them carefully to his feet so they will not slip when he needs them most. The nymphs do not ask for promises. They know these tools are meant for one task. When it is done, either Perseus will not return, or the tools will pass on to other hands in other stories. This exchange is quiet, without ceremony. It is quiet of people who understand risk and do not decorate it. Perseus thanks them, not in grand speeches, but in the plain way one acknowledges real help. Then he turns toward the coast that faces the far edge of the world. What he has now is not just weapons, but a complete method. The shield to see without being seen. The blade to strike quickly. The sack to hold what must not be touched. The helm to vanish when the time comes to leave. And the sandals to make the ground shorter. From here, there's no more seeking guidance. The next step is the cave and the woman who lives there. Chapter 8. The Cave and the Strike. The path from the Nymphs' grove to the coast feels different from the road that brought Perseus this far. Before, he was gathering tools, knowledge, instructions. Now the weight is in the other direction. The next step is the one where nothing else can be added, only used. The coast that holds Medusa's cave is not marked on any ordinary map. It is the sort of place sailors describe in half-truths. A dangerous stretch of water, a rocky shelf where no one lands unless forced, a headland that seems to hold its own shadow even at noon. The air is sharp with salt. The wind here moves differently. It pushes rather than flows, as though it wants anything loose to go back out to sea. From a distance, the cave looks small, its dark mouth set in a cliff face. Only when you stand at the base of the rock does it widen into something a person could walk into upright. The ground at the entrance is uneven, shaped by centuries of waves, striking and retreating. Pools in the stone hold brackish water, and a few trapped fish that never make it back to the sea. And then there are the statues. They are not arranged. There is no order or pattern. Some stand as if startled mid-step. Others have turned, an arm lifted. The detail is uncanny. A fold of cloth caught as it moves. A line at the corner of a mouth. Time and sea spray have worn them, but not enough to erase the fact that they were people once. For Perseus, they are both warning and confirmation. He is in the right place. He doesn't let his eyes drift towards the cave mouth. Athena's rule is firm. Do not look directly. He holds the polished shield at an angle, catching the shape of the entrance in its curve. The reflected image is slightly distorted, but enough to guide his feet. Inside, the air changes. It is cooler, denser, with the smell of damp stone. The sound of the sea fades to a muffled rhythm, replaced by a faint hiss and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. The shield shows a rough floor, darker shadows deeper in, and the outline of a figure lying still. Medusa is asleep. The snakes in her hair rest in loose coils, shifting only slightly as she breathes. Her face in reflection is calm, not twisted in anger or fear. If the shield could carry sound, perhaps Perseus would hear the quiet breath of someone long used to sleeping lightly. Her sisters are not in sight. In some tellings, they are away, hunting or patrolling. In others, they are near enough to hear, but not close enough to stop what is coming. Perseus does not test which is true. He positions himself, feet set for balance, the harp in his right hand, the shield still tilted so the image in its surface guides his movements. Each step is deliberate, weight placed silently, the way Hermes taught him. The moment he's within reach, he moves. One smooth motion, the blade through the neck, the head separated before there is time for a breath to change. The bag, the kibisis, is ready. He tips the head into it without looking, the leather drawn close at once. The weight changes the line of the strap across his shoulder. He feels the shift and adjusts. From the cut flows more than blood. In the myths, this is the moment when Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a man armed in gold, spring from Medusa's body. The ancients say they are her children by Poseidon, born fully formed the instant she dies. In the cave's dimness, it is hard to imagine where they could go. Yet in the telling, they vanish into their own fates, separate from hers. Perseus does not linger. The strike is not the end of danger. It is the start of a different kind. If his sisters return now, there will be no shield clever enough to save him from two immortals who know this ground better than he does. He pulls the helm of Hades over his head, and the air changes around him. The kind of change you feel when something in a room is there, but no longer visible. The winged sandals take him from stone to air, from the mouth of the cave to the open coast. Below, the sea breaks itself on the rocks as it always has, indifferent to who stands above. Behind, the statues keep their places, silent witnesses to both her life and her death. There is no turning back to see what expression her face wears now. The head in the bag is still dangerous, still able to do what it did in life. That power will not fade. In Greek art, this is the moment often captured. Perseus mid-stride, the bag at his side, the shield and sword still in hand. But art freezes it. In the story, he's moving quickly, every muscle tuned to living. The cave becomes a smaller shape in the distance, then disappears entirely as sea and land change under the flight of the sandals. This is the last time Medusa's body is in the place she chose for herself. From here, she will exist only as the head in the bag, the face on a shield, a symbol in a story told far from the sound of her sea. For Perseus, the hardest part is not yet over. He still has to carry this thing through the human world, past kings and gods, with their own plans for it. But for Medusa, the story has shifted from a life, even a life in exile, to an object others will claim. In the next chapter, we will see how that head is used, and how the face that once belonged to a mortal woman becomes a fixed image on the armor of a goddess. Chapter 9. The head as weapon, the face as symbol. The wind over the sea feels different now. Perseus is still moving fast, but his speed is no longer the rush of escape. It is the steady rhythm of travel. The kibbasis rests against his side, its weight a constant reminder that what he carries is not simply a trophy, but a living danger. The head inside is not dead in the usual sense. The eyes can still strike. The power is unchanged. The first time he uses it, it's not in anger, but in rescue. Perseus comes to a coast, where people are gathered on the rocks, pointing toward the water. There's a woman chained there, Andromeda, offered as a sacrifice to a sea monster, sent to punish her land. The creature rises from the water with the slow, dreadful certainty of something that has been here before and will come again unless stopped. In the versions where Perseus sees this, there's no time to negotiate with the king who ordered her chained. The monster is close enough for the spray from its movements to wet her hair. Perseus acts in the simplest way he can. He opens the kibbasis just enough, turns the head towards the creature's eyes. In an instant, the sea boils around a new shape. Stone where there was flesh, motion locked in place. The monster sinks, still frozen, to the bottom. Andromeda is freed. That moment begins a pattern. Back on Seriphus, the island where Perseus began, King Polydectes has not changed his intentions toward Danae. Perseus returns quietly, without announcing himself, and walks into the king's hall carrying the kibbasis. When Polydectes and his men gather to see what the boy they sent away has brought back, Perseus opens the bag again, and the room becomes a gallery of stone. This is the double nature of the head now. It is a weapon and a judgment. It works on monsters from the sea, on rulers in their halls, on any who meets its gaze. It is not selective. It does not choose the guilty. It simply answers the act of looking with final stillness. In Greek storytelling, weapons that come from the gods rarely stay with mortals for long. This one is no different. Perseus gives it to Athena, the goddess who began this quest by making it possible. She mounts it on her aegis, the shield or breastplate she carries into battle. From then on, wherever Athena goes, Medusa's face goes with her. This is the moment when Medusa changes from a figure in a single myth to a symbol that will last as long as Greek culture itself. The Gorgonion, the face of the Gorgon, becomes a familiar image in art and architecture. It appears on shields in sculpture, carved into temple pediments, painted on pottery. It is worn as a pendant, set into the center of a warrior's armor, or placed above a doorway to guard a home. In the oldest versions, the Gorgon face is fierce, almost animal-like, with tusks and a wide mouth. Over time, the features soften. By the classical period, the face is human, even beautiful, but the wide eyes remain, unblinking, direct. The change tells us something about how the Greeks were beginning to think of protection, less about sheer terror, more about the watchful gaze that keeps danger away. Archaeologists find these images across the Greek world, in sanctuaries, in public spaces, in private homes. The same face that once belonged to a mortal woman in a remote cave now stares from the walls of temples and the armor of generals. And yet, if you look closely at the way ancient artists rendered her, there's almost always something that doesn't quite belong to the human. The snakes may be smaller, but they are still there, twined like ornaments. The eyes are still too wide, the expression too fixed. She is not entirely returned to the world of mortals. Athena's use of the head is practical. In battle, the aegis is a shield against modern weapons. It is a shield against the will to fight at all. To see that face, even in the heat of combat, is to feel a pull towards stillness, towards stopping. For Medusa, this is the end of her own movement in the story. She will not speak again, will not choose again, but her image will be carried into every place Athena goes. It is a strange kind of survival, not in body, not in voice, but in presence. The woman who lived alone on a shore, who made her exile into something she could live with, is now the emblem of a goddess who rules with strategy and skill. The ancients did not see this as a contradiction. The same image could be monster and protector, danger and guardian, depending on who held it and how it was used. To them, Medusa's head was simply power, and power in their world was always a matter of who controlled it. In the next chapter, we will step away from the immediate story and follow what happens to that image. How the face of Medusa travels through centuries, changes shape in art, and comes to mean something different in each age that claims her. Chapter 10: Legacy and Retelling. Once the myths of Greece and Rome had fixed Medusa's face on Athena's shield, you might expect her story to stay there, unchanging, like the stone her eyes could create. But the myths are not statues. They travel, they shift, and the face of Medusa has been reshaped more times than we can count. In the centuries after the classical age, her image never truly disappears. Roman mosaics, some laid in villas far from the coast, still show her staring out from the floor. Coins struck with her face circulate through markets. Small amulets, worn on cords or pinned to clothing, carry her likeness as a charm against harm. When the Roman Empire fades into Byzantine, the image survives in altered form. Christian artists often strip away the snakes, softening the face even further, but the wide eyes remain. In some medieval manuscripts, she appears as an allegory for sin, the gaze that turns the soul to stone. This is no longer the Greek Medusa, the woman in a cave. This is a symbol in a different moral world. By the Renaissance, artists like Benvenuto Cellini and Caravaggio look back to Ovid. They paint or sculpt Medusa in the instant of her death, the mouth open, the snakes writhing, the eyes still alive with their fatal power. Cellini's bronze show Perseus holding her head high, a scene both triumphant and unsettling. Caravaggio's painted shield catches the moment with such immediacy that you almost expect the eyes to turn toward you. Archaeologists digging in Italy, Greece, and beyond still uncover the older, harder faces, the archaic gorgons, with tusks and lolling tongues. These finds remind us that Ovid's tragic beauty was only one layer of a much older and stranger tradition. The early Greeks may not have thought of her as a victim at all, but as a guardian spirit, one whose fearsome features kept harm away from sacred spaces. In the modern era, Medusa takes on new roles. Some writers and artists reclaim her as a figure of female rage, the woman wronged, punished unjustly, and transformed into something that no one can harm again. Others use her as a warning about power, about the way even a protective gaze can be turned into a weapon in the wrong hands. The image appears on fashion, on book covers, in films. Some modern interpretations return her snakes to full life, celebrating them as part of her beauty rather than her curse. Others strip them away entirely, leaving only the intense gaze. Each choice says something about what the artist and their audience sees in her. And through it all, one thing remains the same. The story begins with a mortal woman and ends with a face that outlives her. If you walk into a museum today and find her there, on a vase, on a fragment of temple stone, you might pause longer than you expect. The room around you falls quiet. You meet those carved eyes knowing they are only stone, and still you feel that ancient reflex to look away. That is the measure of her endurance. Even stripped of power, even without breath, she holds a space in our minds that few other figures can. In telling her story slowly, as we have tonight, we walked from the far edge of the world to the halls of the gods, through the hands of the poets, across centuries of retelling. We've seen her as a guardian, as exile, as weapon, as emblem. We watched her become what each age needed her to be. And perhaps the most human thing about Medusa is that she's never just one of these. She's all of them, layered and unresolved. So as this telling comes to its end, and you close your eyes, maybe you can picture her not at the moment of her death, not as a head on a shield, but in the quiet before Perseus arrived. The sea outside her cave, the wind over the rocks, the weight of her own thoughts. In that moment, she is neither monster nor saint, just someone who has learned to live with what the world has made of her. And maybe that is why we still remember. You've been listening to the Lady Mythos, where forgotten stories breathe again. If your eyes are still open, let them close now. Let the shadows settle and the waves grow quiet. And if you're already dreaming, maybe you'll meet her there, not as a monster, not as a curse, but as the girl she once was, standing by the sea. A girl who saw too much, and who learned to meet the world's gaze without looking away. Sweet dreams, sleep tight, and thank you for listening.